My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 68 years old, and on a birthday cruise meant to reunite me with my only son, I discovered he and his wife were trying to poison me for my inheritance. But instead of confronting them, I smiled, played along, and gathered every piece of evidence to turn their own wicked plan against them. I'm telling my story from my little bookstore in Annapolis, Maryland. It's a quiet afternoon here, with the scent of old books and brewing tea filling the air. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Let me know in the comments below. It makes the world feel a little smaller, a little kinder. It all began on a Tuesday, a day like any other, steeped in the quiet dignity of my life's work. I was standing in my bookstore, the printed page, carefully dusting a row of leather-bound classics. The air, my favorite perfume, was a mix of aging paper, binding glue, and the faint, salty tang of the Annapolis harbor drifting in through the open door. My late husband, Richard, had built this place with his own 2 hands and a heart full of dreams. He wasn't a businessman, he was a custodian of stories. I remember one evening, years ago, after a particularly slow sales week, I'd been fretting over the ledgers. He gently closed the book, his large, warm hand covering mine. "Our greatest inheritance isn't in a bank account, Eleanor," he'd said, his eyes sweeping across the towering shelves that were his pride and joy. "It's this. It's the stories we keep safe for others." After Richard's funeral 5 years ago, the silence he left behind became a physical presence in our small apartment above the store. The bookstore was my refuge, my purpose. It was the only place I still felt his presence, in the worn floorboards and the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco that had somehow seeped into the walls. It was my work, my home, my entire world. My son, Michael, and his wife, Victoria, had made the trip for the funeral. Their presence felt perfunctory. Victoria, ever chic, wore a black designer dress that seemed more suited for a cocktail party than a somber farewell. Michael's hug was brief, his pats on my back awkward and hollow. They stayed for 2 days, their conversation a constant, circling drone about the responsibilities of the store, the stress it must be for me, the prime real estate value of the building. They weren't offering help, they were assessing an asset. Then, they left. And for 4 years, that was the extent of our relationship. An echoing silence. No calls on Christmas, despite the hand-knitted sweater I sent Michael every year. No card on my birthday. I learned he'd received a major promotion at his architectural firm not from a proud phone call, but from a gushing social media post by a distant cousin. The silence was made all the more bitter by the memory of the last time we'd had any significant contact. It was just after Richard's death. Michael's latest business venture, some sort of high-risk property development, had collapsed. They were facing ruin. I didn't hesitate. I took a substantial amount from my savings, money Richard and I had earmarked for our own quiet retirement, and gave it to them. I told myself it was an advance on their inheritance, a way for their father to help them even after he was gone. I'd hoped it would be a bridge back to each other. Instead, they took the money and built a wall. So, when the FedEx envelope arrived on the morning of my 68th birthday, bearing a sleek, expensive logo from a luxury cruise line, my hands trembled. Inside were not just tickets, but a full itinerary for a 7-day Alaskan cruise, in a suite with a private balcony. Tucked into the folder was a card, with a few lines of Michael's familiar, messy handwriting. "Mom, we miss you. It's been too long. Let us celebrate your birthday and make up for lost time. All expenses paid. Love, Michael and Victoria." Hope, I've learned, is a stubborn and often foolish weed. It sprouted in the barren soil of my heart. Maybe they felt guilty. Maybe they had matured. Maybe they finally understood the value of family over finance. I called Clara, my bookstore manager and my closest friend, to tell her the news. Clara, who had seen me through the lonely years, was pragmatic. "Eleanor, that's extravagant," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "After all this time." "Maybe that's the point, Clara," I argued, more to convince myself than her. "A grand gesture to make up for everything." Just be careful, she'd warned. People don't change overnight. I chose to ignore her caution. I packed my warmest coats, my sturdiest walking shoes, and a heart brimming with a fragile, desperate optimism. I was going to get my son back. I allowed myself to dream of conversations on the deck, of shared laughter over dinner, of healing the chasm that had opened between us. I was a fool, of course. But I was a hopeful one. And that, as it turned out, was a very dangerous thing to be. The ship was a floating palace, a behemoth of glass and steel that glittered against the Seattle skyline. Michael and Victoria were waiting for me at the VIP check-in, their smiles as bright and polished as the ship's brass railings. Victoria enveloped me in a cloud of expensive perfume and a hug that felt both tight and distant. "Eleanor, you look absolutely wonderful. The sea air will be marvelous for you." "Doesn't she look wonderful, Michael?" Michael's hug was a bit more genuine, but his eyes darted around as if he were expecting someone. "It's so good to see you, Mom. We're going to have a great time." My suite was breathtaking, larger than my entire living room back home, with a king-sized bed, a marble bathroom, and a private balcony that offered a panoramic view of the ocean. A bottle of champagne was chilling in an ice bucket. It was all designed to impress, to overwhelm. As I stood there, taking it all in, Victoria began to fuss, unpacking one of my suitcases with an efficiency that felt practiced. "I brought something special for you," she announced, producing a beautifully decorated tin canister. "I know you sometimes have trouble sleeping in new places, and with the time change and all." I blended and packed some herbal tea bags myself. She opened the lid to reveal a row of perfectly uniform, individually sealed tea bags. "It's a mix of chamomile, lavender, and a few other calming herbs. All organic, of course. It will help you relax and get a deep, restful sleep." The gesture was so thoughtful, so specific, that it disarmed me completely. "Victoria, that's incredibly kind of you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do that." "Nonsense," she chirped. "We want you to be comfortable. You deserve to be pampered." That first day was a blur of forced festivity. They hovered around me constantly. At breakfast, a steaming mug was placed before me before I could even ask for coffee. I had them bring up my special blend, Eleanor. It's best to start the day calm. At lunch, Michael waved away the menu. "Mom should have the grilled salmon. It's light and full of omega-3s, good for her heart." When I tried to join a group of women for a lecture on Alaskan wildlife, Victoria gently steered me away. "Oh, that will be so crowded and noisy. Why don't we find a quiet lounge and have a nice chat, just the three of us?" It was suffocating, but I told myself it was love, just expressed in a controlling way. I was so starved for their attention that I accepted the cage as long as it was gilded. The physical symptoms began on the second afternoon. We were on the observation deck, a magnificent glass-domed room at the top of the ship. I stood up to get a better view of a calving glacier, a tremendous spectacle of ice crashing into the sea, when a wave of dizziness washed over me. It was so intense that the entire room seemed to tilt. My vision swam, the brilliant blue of the ice blurring into a fuzzy, indistinct smear. I gripped the back of a chair, my knuckles white. "Mom, are you all right?" Michael asked, rushing to my side, his face a perfect mask of concern. I'm fine," I gasped, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs in a strange, frantic rhythm. "Just stood up too quickly, I suppose." Victoria was there in an instant, her hand cool on my forehead. "You see? You've been overdoing it. Your body isn't used to all this excitement. You need to rest." She guided me back to a plush sofa as if I were a piece of fragile china. That evening, the fog descended. During dinner, I struggled to keep up with the conversation. Michael was talking about a potential promotion, a new salary, and the college fund they were setting up for their future children. I tried to ask a question, but the words felt thick in my mouth. I had a terrifying moment of blankness when I tried to remember Clara's last name. My manager, my friend for 15 years, and her name was just gone. It floated back a few moments later, but the lapse left me shaken. "You look tired, Mom," Michael observed, his brow furrowed. "Let me get you some tea," Victoria said instantly, her voice bright. "It will help." When the cup arrived, I hesitated. The fog, the palpitations, the memory lapse, it was all deeply unsettling. But I was in a public dining room, and I didn't want to make a scene. I took a few sips to be polite. It was on the way back to my cabin that the first thread of their carefully woven tapestry came loose. I excused myself early, claiming a headache. As I walked down the long, carpeted corridor, I realized I'd left my favorite shawl in the dining room. I turned back. The hallway was deserted except for a young waitress pushing a large, rattling cleaning cart. As I drew near, I fumbled in my purse for my room key, and a small, antique locket Richard had given me slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the floor. "Oh, bother," I muttered, bending down with a groan. The waitress, a young woman with kind, dark eyes and a name tag that read Sophia, hurried over and knelt to help me. As she picked up the locket, her fingers brushed mine. She looked up, and her eyes widened with something I couldn't decipher, alarm, maybe pity. She glanced nervously down the empty hall. "Ma'am," she whispered, her voice so low I could barely hear it over the hum of the ship. "I clean the service pantries. Where the hot water is dispensed." I was confused by the non sequitur. "I'm sorry?" "The tea," she said, her eyes boring into mine with an intensity that startled me. "Your daughter-in-law, she doesn't use the ship's tea. She brings her own pre-packaged bags." She pressed the locket into my palm, her hand trembling. And then she delivered the words that would shatter my world. "Don't drink it. Please. Whatever you do, do not drink the tea." Before I could form a question, before I could even process the terrifying implication of her words, she stood up, grabbed her cart, and practically fled down the corridor, disappearing into a service door without a backward glance. I stood frozen, the warm gold of the locket suddenly feeling cold as ice against my skin. She brings her own. Don't drink the tea. My mind screamed that it was a mistake, a bizarre misunderstanding. But my body, with its strange new ailments, told a different story. I looked toward the dining room, where my son and his wife were laughing, and a horrifying, unthinkable suspicion began to take root in my heart. I stumbled back to my suite in a daze, Sophia's words echoing in my head. "Don't drink the tea." The sentence was a key, unlocking a room in my mind I had desperately tried to keep sealed. Inside were all the small, unsettling details of the past 48 hours, the suffocating attention, the insistence on their specialty, my sudden, inexplicable symptoms. It was a pattern, and it was terrifying. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, my heart thudding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, my mind racing. I was a prisoner on a floating city, trapped with two people I could no longer trust. My first instinct was to confront them, to scream, to demand an explanation. But what would that accomplish? They would deny it, call me hysterical, use my accusations as further proof of my confusion. No, confrontation was what they would expect. It was what a victim would do. And I could not afford to be a victim. The next morning, I rose with a chilling new purpose. I would play their game. At breakfast, when Victoria approached the table with a steaming mug, a bright smile plastered on her face, I smiled back. "Good morning, dear. You know, I think I'll just have some plain orange juice this morning. All that rich food, I think something simple is best." I watched her face like a hawk. For a split second, the smile faltered, a flicker of sheer annoyance in her eyes, before it was smoothed over. "Of course, Eleanor. Whatever you want. We just want you to feel your best." Liar, I thought, as I sipped my juice. My mission for the day was to find Sophia, but it was like trying to find a specific fish in the ocean. The crew was a constantly shifting tide of uniforms. I spent hours wandering the decks, my search growing more desperate. I couldn't ask for her by name, that would be too suspicious. I just had to hope for a chance encounter. Finally, late in the afternoon, I saw her. She was heading into a service corridor on one of the lower decks, a place clearly marked crew only. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was my chance. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I slipped into the hallway after her. The polished guest areas gave way to a world of steel walls and fluorescent lights. I found her in a cramped, windowless supply closet, filled with the clean, sharp scent of industrial cleaning supplies. She was folding stacks of white linen napkins, her back to me. She jumped, dropping a napkin, when I spoke her name. Sophia. She spun around, her eyes wide with pure terror. Ma'am! You can't be in here. If I'm caught talking to a passenger. I'm sorry, I said, quietly closing the heavy metal door behind me, plunging us into the dim, humming quiet of the closet. I won't stay long. But you warned me last night. I need to know why. I need to know what you saw. She hesitated, twisting the napkin in her hands, her gaze fixed on the floor. It's not my place. I could lose my job. This job is paying for my college fund. I looked at this young woman, so clearly terrified, and I knew I couldn't demand anything of her. I had to connect with her. I reached out and gently touched her arm. My name is Eleanor, I said softly. You have very kind eyes. You remind me of someone who is not afraid to do what is right, even when it's hard. That seemed to break through her wall of fear. Tears welled in her eyes, and a story tumbled out, a story that explained everything. My grandmother, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed grief. She raised me. She was strong and healthy. And then a distant cousin, a man she hadn't seen in years, moved in to take care of her after a fall. He was so charming, so helpful. He handled all her finances, drove her to appointments. 6 months later, she was gone. The doctors said her heart just gave out. It was only after the funeral, when we found her bank accounts completely empty, that we understood. But we had no proof. It was just our word against his. She took a shaky breath, the pain of her memory raw and fresh. I'm studying pharmacology online in my spare time. I want to be a pharmacist, to understand how these things work. 2 days ago, in the service pantry, I saw your daughter-in-law. She had one of those sealed tea bags, but I saw her peel back the edge. She used a tiny syringe to inject a clear liquid into it, then she used a travel-sized hair straightener to reseal the paper. It was so fast, so practiced, it gave me a chill. Last night, I saw her do it again. She was so focused, she didn't see me watching from the shadows of the pantry. A cold dread washed over me, so intense I felt dizzy. A syringe. A hair straightener. This wasn't just a suspicion, this was a cold, calculated, methodical plot. Did you see what it was? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her purse was open on the counter, Sophia said, her voice dropping even lower. I saw a small prescription bottle inside. I only saw part of the name. It looked like dioxin. I looked it up. I think it's a brand name for digoxin. It's a very powerful heart medication. In small, repeated doses in an older person, it can build up in their system. It causes confusion, fatigue, palpitations, and eventually, it can induce cardiac arrest that looks almost identical to natural heart failure. It's very difficult to detect in a standard autopsy unless you are specifically looking for it. The pieces of the puzzle didn't just click into place, they slammed together with the force of a car crash. My symptoms. Their feigned concern. Their talk of my failing health. They weren't just trying to get my money. They were trying to kill me in a way that would leave them blameless, free to inherit everything. I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated rage, so hot it burned away my fear. I looked at this brave young woman who had risked her job and her future for a stranger, all because of the painful memory of her own grandmother. In that moment, a new resolve hardened within me. I would not be a silent victim. "Sophia," I said, my voice gaining a steely edge I didn't know I possessed. "You have done more than enough. You have been incredibly brave. Now, I need you to do one more thing for me: stay safe. Go back to work and act as if this conversation never, ever happened. Can you do that?" She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Yes. But what are you going to do?" I met her gaze in the dim light of the supply closet, a silent promise passing between us. "I'm going to let them think their plan is working," I said, my voice cold and clear as glacial ice. "And I'm going to gather every piece of proof I need to make sure they spend the rest of their lives regretting the day they decided to underestimate Eleanor Vance." Leaving the humming silence of the supply closet, I felt as though I had shed a skin. The hopeful, grieving mother who had boarded the ship was gone. In her place was a woman I barely recognized, cold, calculating, and fueled by a righteous fury. The fear was still there, a knot of ice in my stomach, but it was now a tool, a whetstone to sharpen my focus. My first stop was the ship's gift shop, an emporium of overpriced souvenirs and vacation necessities. I bypassed the t-shirts and snow globes and went straight to the stationery section. I selected a small, black, hardcover notebook with a sturdy binding and thick, creamy pages, along with a smooth-flowing black ink pen. It felt less like a purchase and more like an acquisition of armaments. Back in the sterile quiet of my suite, I sat at the small writing desk overlooking the vast, indifferent ocean. I opened the notebook to the first page. The blankness was a canvas for my new reality. At the top, I wrote the date. Underneath, I began to build my case, my handwriting clear and steady. Day 1, boarded ship, 2 p.m. VNM overly attentive. Victoria presented tin of homemade herbal tea. Drank 1 cup before bed, approximate 10:30 p.m. Slept heavily, unusual for me. Day 2, woke feeling groggy. Symptoms began after breakfast tea, approximate 9 a.m. Dizziness on observation deck, approximate 2:15 p.m. Heart palpitations noted. Mental fog, difficulty with word recall during dinner. Sophia's verbal warning given in hallway, approximate 9:45 p.m. Day 3, met with Sophia in lower deck supply closet, approximate 3:30 p.m. Learned of possible drug, digoxin. Method, syringe injection into pre-packaged tea bags, resealed with heat. Motive, to induce symptoms of natural heart failure. The intent is murder. I documented every meal, every drink I was offered, every saccharine comment about my health. I noted times, locations, and witnesses, however incidental. The act of writing, of translating the chaos in my head into orderly, factual lines, was anchoring. It was a declaration of war on a private, paper battlefield. That afternoon, I knew I needed more than just a written record. Janice, my lawyer, had drilled into me the importance of corroborating evidence during the messy legal battle that followed Richard's death over a disputed business contract. "Eleanor," she'd said, "in any fight, assume the other side will lie. Your best defense is proof that can't talk back." My first attempt to get that proof was a clumsy failure. I sat on my balcony, pretending to read, my phone tucked into the cushion beside me, its audio recorder running. I was hoping they might let something slip. They came out to join me, their conversation a bland stream of observations about the weather and the other passengers. Then, Victoria's sharp eyes landed on my phone. "Oh, Eleanor, is that a new phone? It's so sleek." "May I see?" she asked, her hand already reaching out. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. I snatched the phone up a second before her fingers could brush the screen. "Oh. It's a bit complicated for me," I stammered, fumbling to stop the recording and shove the phone deep into my purse. My old one was so much simpler. I'm still learning how to work this one. She gave me a strange, penetrating look, a slight narrowing of her eyes that told me she didn't quite believe me. Of course. Let me know if you need any help with it. It was a terrifyingly close call. I had been amateurish. They were cautious, disciplined in their deception. They weren't going to sit around openly discussing their plot. I realized with a sinking heart that I couldn't just wait for them to make a mistake. I had to force one. Later that evening, an opportunity presented itself. I was walking past their suite on my way to the library when I heard their voices through the door, which was slightly ajar. They were arguing, their voices low and tense. Can't believe she refused the tea again, Victoria was hissing. This is taking too long. The dosage needs to be consistent. What do you want me to do, Vic? Force it down her throat? Michael's voice was weary, laced with an irritation that sounded genuine. She's getting suspicious. The way she looked at you this morning. She's not suspicious, she's just being difficult, Victoria snapped. We need to push things along. At the next port, I'm going to find something stronger, something that can be mixed into juice or soup. Something tasteless. We're running out of time before my promotion is announced and we need to have her assets secured for the bank loan. I flattened myself against the wall, my heart hammering. Stronger. Tasteless. Bank loan. The cold, businesslike cruelty of it stole my breath. This wasn't just about inheritance, it was about a specific financial deadline. My life had a price tag and an expiration date dictated by their career ambitions. I crept away, my mind reeling. The notebook was a start, but it wasn't enough. I needed physical proof. I needed something I could hold in my hand and say, here. Here is the poison. And I knew I was running out of time to get it. The next port of call was Juneau, a small city nestled between mountains and sea. The ship would be docked for 6 hours. I knew this was my only real chance to get physical evidence off the ship and into the hands of professionals. The plan that formed in my mind was audacious and fraught with risk, but it was the only path I could see forward. That morning, I played my part with Oscar-worthy dedication. I allowed Victoria to bring me a cup of her special morning tea to my suite. I held the warm cup in my trembling hands, a performance I had been practicing. Thank you, dear, I said, my voice a weak, papery whisper. You are so good to me. I raised the cup to my lips, her sharp eyes tracking my every move. The faintly bitter, metallic taste coated my tongue. I forced myself to swallow a small amount, my throat constricting in protest. It felt like drinking liquid death. Then, as I set the cup back on its saucer, I let my hand jerk in a convincing spasm. Oh, my goodness! I cried out, my voice filled with manufactured distress. The cup and saucer clattered, and a significant amount of the pale brown liquid splashed across the pristine white linen napkin on my lap. How terribly clumsy of me! Look at that awful stain. Victoria rushed forward with a sigh of thinly veiled impatience. It's nothing, Eleanor, don't worry about it. I'll get you a fresh one. No, it's my favorite linen set, I insisted, clutching the damp napkin. Let me just take this to the restroom and rinse it out immediately before it sets. Before she could argue, I gathered up the napkin, my precious, poisoned evidence, and hurried into the marble bathroom, locking the door firmly behind me. My heart was pounding with a mixture of revulsion and triumph. I didn't rinse it. Instead, I carefully folded the damp cloth, sealed it inside a Ziploc bag I'd taken from the minibar, and tucked it deep inside my handbag. When I emerged, I told them I felt a sudden, desperate need for some fresh air. And I promised Clara I would get her a little something from Alaska, I lied, forcing a weak smile. The walk might do me good. They were hesitant, exchanging a worried glance. Are you sure you're up to it, Mom? Michael asked. We can go with you. No, I said, injecting a note of elderly stubbornness into my voice. I'm not an invalid yet. I just want to walk for a little while by myself, to clear my head. Reluctantly, they agreed, on the condition that I take my phone and meet them back at the ship in exactly 2 hours. The moment I was down the gangplank and out of their line of sight, my frail shuffle transformed into a brisk, purposeful walk. I wasn't a tourist. I was a woman on a mission. Ignoring the glittering jewelry stores and souvenir shops, I headed straight for a small medical building I had spotted from the ship's deck, its sign promising express diagnostic services. I walked in, the clinical smell of antiseptic a welcome contrast to the cloying perfume of deception on the ship. I approached the front desk, where a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes looked up from her paperwork. I launched into the cover story I had rehearsed in my head. "Good morning," I began, my voice filled with the anxious concern of a dear friend. "My elderly friend is on this cruise with me. She's a widow, and her daughter-in-law is very attentive. She makes her a special herbal tea every day, but my friend has been feeling so unwell since we boarded. Confused, dizzy, her heart acting up. I'm terribly worried." I leaned in conspiratorially. "I think there might be something in the tea. She spilled some this morning." I pulled out the sealed bag with the napkin. "I know this is a strange request, but can you test this for any unusual substances? Specifically, I'm worried about cardiac medications, like for a heart condition." The technician, whose name tag read Brenda, gave me a long, searching look. I could see her weighing my story. I held her gaze, letting her see the genuine fear in my eyes. It wasn't hard to summon. Maybe she'd seen too many stories of elder abuse, of families torn apart by greed after a divorce or a death. "That is indeed a strange request," she said slowly. "And a toxicology screen is expensive." "I'll pay in cash," I said immediately, pulling a thick envelope from my purse. "And I'll pay for the express service. I need to know. I need to know if my friend is safe." She finally nodded. "All right. I can run a comprehensive panel. I can have preliminary results for you via a secure email in about 90 minutes. It will be a password-protected file." I gave her my most secure, rarely used email address and a password only I would know. Leaving the lab, I felt as though I had just passed a critical checkpoint in a race against my own death. I had 90 minutes. I found a small, quiet coffee shop, ordered a scone I couldn't eat, and made the most important call of my life. When Janice, my lawyer, answered, her sharp, familiar voice was a lifeline. "Eleanor. How's Alaska? I was so surprised to hear you were taking a trip with Michael." "Janice, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I'm in serious trouble." I poured out the entire story, the tea, the symptoms, Sophia's warning, the napkin I had just dropped off at the lab. She listened in the stunned, professional silence I knew so well, a silence that meant her formidable legal mind was processing, analyzing, strategizing. "Good God, Eleanor," she finally breathed when I was done. "That's not the worst of it, Janice," I said, my voice tight. "I need to ask you something. Have you had any contact with Michael or Victoria recently? In the past few months?" There was a pause on the line, a silence so heavy I could feel it across the thousands of miles. When Janice spoke again, her voice was vibrating with a cold, controlled fury that was more terrifying than any shout. "Eleanor, this is worse than you think. Michael called my office 2 weeks before your trip. He said he was worried about you, that you were becoming very forgetful, showing signs of what he called significant cognitive decline." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. "He asked what the legal procedure would be to activate his durable power of attorney," Janice continued, her voice like chipping ice. "He wanted to know what evidence he would need to present to a court to have you declared legally unfit to manage your own affairs. He was asking how to take control of everything, Eleanor. The house, the investments, the bookstore. He was laying the groundwork for a legal custody battle over you and your assets." I closed my eyes, the coffee shop blurring into a meaningless swirl of color. This wasn't a spontaneous act of greed that had festered on the ship. This was a cold, premeditated conspiracy. The cruise was just the final, ugly act in a play they had written weeks ago. Just then, my phone buzzed with an incoming email notification. It was from the lab. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type in the password. The report loaded, a sterile PDF document. But the words in the summary section were stark and damning, highlighted in bold red type. Substance detected, digoxin. Concentration, significant, consistent with therapeutic to toxic levels with repeated administration. Janice, I whispered into the phone, my voice breaking for the first time, a single, hot tear tracing a path down my cold cheek. I have the proof. It's here. In writing. Okay, Eleanor, Janice's voice was instantly transformed, the shock replaced by the fierce, protective tone of a warrior. Listen to me. You are not a victim. You are my client. And we are in a fight. That lab report is a smoking gun, but we need to prove intent beyond a reasonable doubt. You need to get them on tape, Eleanor. You need to get them to admit what they want, in their own words. Can you do that for me? I looked out the window at the cold, majestic mountains, so pure and unforgiving. I thought of Richard. I thought of my bookstore. I thought of my life, my story, that they were trying to steal and rewrite with a tragic ending. Yes, I said, my voice no longer a whisper, but a promise forged in ice and fire. I can. Returning to the ship was like knowingly stepping back into a cage with two smiling predators. But this time, I was no longer just the bait. I was the trap. The fear was still a cold knot in my gut, but it was now overlaid with a diamond-hard resolve. Janice's words were a mantra in my head, irrefutable proof of their intent. My first mission was to acquire the right tool. The ship's high-end electronics store, a glittering boutique of cameras and gadgets, was my destination. I approached a young, eager salesman, putting on my most benign, slightly befuddled grandmotherly air. "Good morning," I said with a warm smile. "I'm looking for a gift for my grandson. He's starting college soon, and I want to get him something, new and techy. Something for his dorm room." He immediately led me to a display of Bluetooth speakers and gaming accessories. I feigned interest before letting my eyes wander. "Oh, what about that?" I asked, pointing to a sleek, black digital alarm clock. It was small, modern, and unobtrusive. It was also a model I had recognized from Janice's description of popular nanny cams. "An excellent choice, ma'am," the salesman enthused. "It's a smart clock. Plays music, charges his phone, very popular." "It's lovely," I said. "Does the clock face stay lit up all the time?" "I wouldn't want it to keep him awake." "You can set the display to be bright, dim, or off completely," he explained, unknowingly handing me the key to my plan. "Perfect," I declared. "I'll take it." I also purchased the largest capacity memory card they had. Back in the privacy of my suite, I unwrapped my purchase with the precision of a bomb squad technician. The instructions were simple. The camera lens was a microscopic pinhole, virtually invisible in the dark, glossy face of the clock. A single, discreet button on the back started and stopped the recording. I practiced with it, my fingers surprisingly nimble, my mind sharp and focused. I positioned it on the bedside table, angling it perfectly to capture a wide shot of the suite's main seating area. It was the perfect, silent, impartial witness. Now, I had to set the stage. For the next 24 hours, I fully embraced the role of the deteriorating matriarch. It was a grim, soul-crushing performance. I forgot my cabin number on the way back from the library. I seemed confused about what day it was during lunch, asking if it was Thursday when it was clearly Saturday. I complained constantly of a pounding heart and a debilitating fatigue that made it hard to even walk on the deck. It was sickening to see how readily they believed it, how their faces swam with a disgusting mixture of feigned pity and triumphant validation. They would exchange long, meaningful glances over my head, their eyes gleaming. Their plan was working. Mother was fading, just as they'd hoped. The evening before we were scheduled to dock in Ketchikan, our last major port of call, I decided it was time. I summoned them to my suite, telling them I needed to talk to them about the future. I arranged myself in a large armchair, a thick cashmere shawl draped around my shoulders, looking as frail and defeated as I possibly could. The little black clock on the nightstand was silent, its face dark, its tiny recording light safely hidden from view. The trap was set. They entered, their faces composed into masks of solemn concern. They sat on the sofa opposite me, leaning forward expectantly. "Michael, Victoria," I began, my voice a carefully engineered quaver. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few days. And I think you were right." I let my voice crack. "I'm not well. I'm so tired. I'm tired of fighting it." Victoria reached out and patted my hand, her touch cool and dry. "Oh, Eleanor. We're so sorry you're feeling this way. But we're here for you. Admitting you need help is the first step." "I'm ready to accept your help," I continued, my gaze moving from my son's earnest face to my daughter-in-law's predatory one. "I want you to handle things for me. But I'm an old woman. I need to understand what that means. I've worked my whole life, built something with your father. I need to know what you're planning." The bait was in the water. I held my breath. Michael cleared his throat, taking on the role of the responsible, caring son. "Well, Mom, the first thing is to get you settled somewhere safe and comfortable. The facility we looked at in Florida is truly top-notch. It has round-the-clock medical care, beautiful grounds." "And what about my home?" I asked, my voice small and lost. "The bookstore?" Victoria leaned forward, her smile gentle but her eyes as hard and cold as diamonds. "Eleanor, you can't possibly continue to run the store. It's far too much for you in your condition. We'll handle the sale of the property. It's a prime piece of commercial real estate in downtown Annapolis. The money from that, combined with your other investments, will be more than enough to set up a fund to cover your care for the rest of your life. It's the most sensible financial decision." "The sale?" I whispered, letting my chin tremble. "But Richard built that store with his own hands. It was his legacy. Our legacy." Michael sighed, a long, theatrical sound of practiced patience. "Mom, Dad is gone. We have to be realistic. This isn't about sentiment, it's about securing your future and your health. To do all this, we'll need to have you sign over the durable power of attorney, of course. It simplifies everything. It allows us to manage your accounts, make medical decisions, and handle the property sale without having to bother you with every little signature, every little detail." There it was. The confession. Not an admission of poison, but something just as damning in a court of law, a clear, unambiguous statement of their intent to seize control of my assets, predicated on the very failing health they were secretly inducing. I looked at my son, the baby I had once rocked to sleep, and I felt a grief so profound it was a physical ache in my chest. But my voice, when I finally spoke, was steady. "I see," I said softly. "So you would sell the printed page." "It's for the best," Victoria said smoothly, a final, triumphant nail in her own coffin. I took a deep, shuddering breath, a perfect imitation of a weary sigh. "Thank you for being so honest with me. I need to rest now. I'm very tired. We can talk more tomorrow." They left my suite glowing with success, convinced they had finally broken me. The moment the door clicked shut, I moved. My hands were perfectly steady as I walked over to the little black clock and pressed the button to stop the recording. I ejected the tiny memory card and slipped it into the hidden pocket of my wallet. Then, I picked up the cabin phone and dialed the ship's operator. My voice was no longer weak or trembling. It was the voice of a woman who had just won a war. "I need to be connected to your head of security, please. Immediately." My name is Eleanor Vance. And I need to report a serious crime in progress. The response from the ship's command was swifter and more serious than I could have possibly anticipated. The operator's professional tone shifted to one of alarm, and she put me on hold for only a moment before a man's deep, authoritative voice came on the line. This is Officer Givens, head of security. To whom am I speaking? My name is Eleanor Vance. I am a passenger in Suite 704. I need to speak with you in person, immediately, about a criminal matter. I'm on my way, Mrs. Vance, he said, no hesitation in his voice. Within 10 minutes, there was a firm, discreet knock on my door. I opened it to a tall, powerfully built man in a crisp officer's uniform. His face was stern, his eyes sharp and analytical, doing a quick, professional sweep of my suite before they settled on me. This was not a man who rattled easily. Mrs. Vance? He asked. Yes, officer. Please, come in. I was no longer the frail, trembling woman from an hour ago. I was calm, composed, and ready for battle. I motioned for him to sit on the sofa. I knew that how I presented my case was critical. I couldn't appear hysterical or emotional. I needed to be factual, logical, and credible. I didn't start with the most dramatic accusation. I started by building a foundation of evidence. Officer, I began, my voice even, I have reason to believe that 2 fellow passengers, my son Michael Vance and his wife Victoria Vance, who are traveling with me, are attempting to harm me for significant financial gain. Givens's expression remained impassive, but I saw the subtle shift. He was listening. He pulled out a small, official-looking notepad. Could you please elaborate on the nature of this harm, ma'am? This was my moment. I didn't cry or raise my voice. I presented my case like a prosecutor making her opening statement. I began by placing the small, black notebook on the coffee table between us. This is a log I have kept for the past 4 days, I explained. It documents my physical symptoms, dizziness, heart palpitations, severe mental fog, which began shortly after my arrival. It also documents every meal and, more specifically, every beverage I have been offered by them, particularly a special herbal tea prepared by my daughter-in-law. He picked it up and flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning my neat, dated entries. He was still non-committal, but he was engaged. Next, I pulled the sealed Ziploc bag containing the stained napkin from my handbag and placed it next to the notebook. This napkin was stained with that same tea, which my daughter-in-law prepared for me yesterday morning. I was able to get it to a private diagnostic lab in Juneau this afternoon. I took out my phone, opened the password-protected email, and handed it to him. This is the official toxicology report. It confirms the presence of a significant concentration of digoxin, a powerful cardiac medication. His eyebrows shot up. The word digoxin was clearly not foreign to him. He took the phone, his large fingers surprisingly deft on the small screen as he scrolled through the report. The skepticism in his eyes was rapidly being replaced by a sharp-edged seriousness. He read the report twice. And finally, officer, I said, my voice dropping slightly, this is the reason I called you tonight. I took the tiny memory card from my wallet and placed it on the table. This memory card is from a concealed camera I placed in this room. It contains a video recording of a conversation I had with my son and daughter-in-law less than an hour ago. In it, you will hear them clearly state their intention to have me institutionalized, take control of all my assets, and sell my home and business, all predicated on the very failing health that I believe they have been systematically inducing with the poison tea. I pushed the tiny black square towards him. I believe they are attempting to commit murder, officer. A slow, quiet murder that would be mistaken for natural causes. Officer Givens was silent for a full minute, his gaze fixed on the 3 pieces of evidence on the table, the journal, the lab report, and the memory card. The pieces of my story. He stood up, his demeanor all business. Mrs. Vance, I need you to stay in your suite and lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me or an officer I designate by name. I am taking this evidence directly to the ship's captain. We will also be contacting our onboard medical officer to get a statement from her regarding this medication." His voice was low and serious. The air in the room had shifted irrevocably. This was no longer a family dispute, it was a major criminal investigation on a vessel under his command. I did as he instructed. The next hour was the longest and strangest of my life. I didn't pace. I sat perfectly still in the armchair, listening to the faint hum of the ship's engines. I felt a profound sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. Finally, there was another knock. It was Givens, and this time he was accompanied by an older woman in a crisp white medical uniform. "Mrs. Vance, this is Dr. Eris, our chief medical officer," Givens said. "Doctor, this is the passenger I spoke to you about." Dr. Eris had kind but no-nonsense eyes. "Mrs. Vance, Officer Givens has briefed me on the situation and the lab report from Juneau. Digoxin toxicity is extremely serious. With your consent, I'd like to take a blood sample. We can confirm the presence and level of the medication in your system right now. It will provide crucial, real-time evidence." "Of course," I said without hesitation. As she efficiently drew my blood, her touch gentle and professional, Officer Givens spoke. "The captain has viewed the video footage from the memory card, ma'am. He agrees that the evidence is compelling and deeply disturbing. He has authorized us to act. We have also pulled the ship's pharmacy logs. While they did not obtain digoxin on board, your son, Michael Vance, did purchase a significant quantity of over-the-counter sleep aids on your second day, establishing a pattern of interest in administering medication to you." After the doctor left with my blood sample, Givens laid out the plan. "They are currently attending the captain's welcome cocktail party for repeat cruisers on the Lido deck. We prefer to handle these matters as discreetly as possible to avoid alarming the other passengers. We are going to approach them and ask them to accompany us to the captain's quarters for a private matter. They will be detained there for questioning." He paused, his gaze steady on mine. "Mrs. Vance, the captain would like to know if you wish to be present for the initial questioning." I considered it for a moment. Did I want to see their faces contort in shock and fear when they were confronted? Did I want to witness their world crumble? The angry, wounded part of me, the part that had been betrayed so deeply, screamed yes. But the stronger part of me, the part that was Richard's wife and the proprietor of the printed page, the part that valued dignity and quiet strength above all else, said no. "No, officer," I said, my voice firm. "I do not need to be there. The evidence speaks for itself. My presence would only turn a serious legal matter into a messy family melodrama. I prefer to let the facts do the talking." He nodded, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something like respect in his professional gaze. "Very well, ma'am. We will handle it from here. Please, remain in your suite. I will update you as soon as I am able." He left, and I was alone again in the silent, luxurious suite. I walked out onto my private balcony. Far across the ship, on an upper deck, I could hear the faint, festive sound of a steel drum band and the murmur of cheerful conversation from the cocktail party. I pictured them there, champagne glasses in hand, smiling and networking, celebrating their impending victory, completely oblivious to the fact that their carefully constructed world was about to be utterly and irrevocably obliterated. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt a profound, aching sadness for the son I had lost long before this cruise ever began, and a quiet, steely resolve for the future I had just fought with everything I had to reclaim. The sea air was cold and clean against my face. I took a deep breath and, for the first time in days, I felt like I could truly breathe again. An hour crawled by, each minute stretching into an eternity. I couldn't sit still. I paced the plush carpet of the suite, the silence pressing in on me. Every creak of the ship, every distant shout, made me jump. Finally, the knock I was waiting for came. It was Officer Givens, and his face was a grim, unreadable mask. "Ma'am," he said, stepping inside. "They are being held in 2 separate conference rooms in the administrative wing. As expected, they are denying everything. Your son is claiming you are mentally unstable, confused, and have a history of making paranoid accusations. Your daughter-in-law is more aggressive. She is threatening to sue the cruise line, you, and me personally for harassment and false imprisonment. I nodded slowly. It was exactly what I had anticipated. They were cornered animals, and they were lashing out. They are not accustomed to being held accountable for their actions. The captain has authorized me to arrange a meeting, Givens continued, his voice low and steady. He feels a direct, controlled confrontation is now necessary. He and I will be present. He wants them to face you, and your evidence, directly. They have been told it is a standard procedural meeting regarding their complaint against the ship's security. This was it. The moment I had tried to avoid, but which their arrogance had now made unavoidable. I had to see them. I had to face them. When? I asked, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. In 10 minutes. In the library conference room. Dr. Eris will be joining us as well. Your blood work came back from our onboard lab. The digoxin levels are elevated, well within a range that would cause all the symptoms you've described. I'll be there, I said. I stood before the mirror and smoothed down my simple cashmere sweater. I looked at the woman staring back at me. Her face was pale and etched with new lines of strain, but her eyes were clear and resolute. The frail, frightened victim was gone. In her place was a woman I was just beginning to know. The library conference room was an intimidating space, paneled in dark, polished mahogany and smelling of old leather and power. The ship's captain, a distinguished man with silver hair and a deeply lined face that spoke of decades at sea, stood as I entered. He shook my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Mrs. Vance, on behalf of my entire crew, I am deeply and profoundly sorry that this has happened on my vessel. It is not your fault, Captain, I said quietly. Evil can travel anywhere. I took a seat at one side of the long, gleaming table. Officer Givens sat beside me, a thin file folder in front of him. Dr. Eris sat on my other side. A moment later, the door opened and Michael and Victoria were escorted in by another security officer. The moment they saw me sitting there, flanked by the ship's highest authorities, their expressions shifted. Victoria's mask of righteous indignation crumbled, replaced by a flicker of pure, animal panic. Michael just looked pale and sick, his eyes wide and haunted. They were seated directly opposite me. The silence in the room was a physical weight, thick and suffocating. The captain began, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of command that left no room for argument. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, we have received a very serious allegation against you, supported by significant evidence. We are giving you this one opportunity to respond to it directly and truthfully. Victoria found her voice first, a high-pitched, theatrical sound of disbelief. This is absolutely outrageous. My mother-in-law is unwell. She has been confused and paranoid for months. We love her. We were only trying to help her. This entire trip was meant to get her to see that she needs professional care, for her own safety. She turned her tear-filled eyes to me. Eleanor, for God's sake, tell them. Tell them this is all a terrible misunderstanding. I met her gaze across the polished wood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I simply reached into my handbag and retrieved the small, black notebook. I slid it across the table until it stopped directly in front of her. That is my journal from the past 4 days, Victoria, I said, my voice quiet but clear. In it, I have documented every cup of your special tea. Then I turned my gaze to my son. He wouldn't look at me. He was staring at his hands, which were clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table. That is my account of the symptoms I began experiencing after drinking it, Michael. He flinched as if I had struck him. Next, I slid a printed copy of the toxicology report from the lab in Juneau across the table. That is the analysis of the tea from the napkin I stained yesterday. It confirms the presence of digoxin. Victoria's face went white as a sheet. She stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Dr. Eris then spoke for the first time, her voice clinical and precise. And my lab confirmed it. The blood I drew from you an hour ago, Mrs. Vance, shows elevated levels of digoxin, consistent with repeated, unprescribed administration. And this, I said, my voice dropping for the final, fatal blow, is the reason we are all here. Officer Givens opened his file, took out a small, sleek tablet, and placed it in the center of the table. He pressed play. The room was filled with the sound of my own voice, frail and trembling, from the recording. I'm ready to accept your help, then came theirs, confident, condescending, their words weaving a tapestry of their greed. We all listened to them lay out their entire plan. The talk of the retirement facility. The selling of my home. The power of attorney. And Victoria's chillingly practical statement about the bookstore, it's the most sensible financial decision. When the video ended, the silence that fell was absolute. It was the sound of ruin. Victoria was staring at the blank screen, her mouth slightly agape, her carefully constructed facade shattered into a million pieces. Michael had finally buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. I looked at my son, this broken, pathetic man across the table, and I felt a grief so profound it was a physical ache. But pity was a luxury I could not afford him. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I had one last thing to say, one final accounting. For 4 years, I began, my voice clear and steady, all trace of weakness gone forever, you left me in a world of silence. No calls. No letters. Nothing. I was a problem to be ignored, a loose end from a life you had moved on from. Then, you reappeared with smiles and expensive gifts, not out of love, but because my so-called inheritance had become a necessary component of your financial planning. I looked directly at Victoria, whose eyes were now filled with a venomous hatred. You smiled at me while you plotted to sell my home. You brought me tea with your own hands, tea that you hoped would quietly stop my heart. Then my eyes, my mother's eyes, settled on my son. He was still hiding his face, unable to meet my gaze. And you, I said, my voice softening with a sorrow that was deeper than anger. You are my son. The child I raised. You held my hand and told me you were scared for me, while you were an active participant in a plan that could have killed me. You didn't do it for my own good. You did it because you failed at your own life, and you decided it was easier to steal mine than to build one for yourself. I picked up my handbag and turned to the captain. Thank you, Captain, Officer Givens, Dr. Eris, for your professionalism and your diligence. Then, without a single backward glance at the 2 people who had tried to erase me from my own life, I walked out of the room. I didn't run. I walked, my back straight, my head held high. I had walked into that room as a mother confronting her children. I walked out as a survivor who had just reclaimed her life. The remainder of the cruise passed in a surreal, protected bubble. The ship's command, clearly wanting to contain the situation and avoid a massive scandal, treated me with the utmost discretion and care. I was moved to a different, even more luxurious suite in a private, access-controlled section of the ship, the kind reserved for dignitaries. A personal steward was assigned to me, and all my meals were served in my room. Officer Givens personally informed me that Michael and Victoria were confined to their cabin under 24-hour guard until we reached our final port in Seattle. At that point, they would be discreetly escorted off the ship by local authorities and sent home. The cruise line's legal team had already been in contact with them, and it was made clear that any public statement would result in the cruise line pursuing its own legal action against them. Their silence had been bought and paid for. I spent my last full day at sea alone on my vast, private balcony, wrapped in a thick wool blanket provided by the ship, watching the gray, misty coastline of Washington slide by. The adrenaline had finally worn off, leaving behind a deep, bone-wearying exhaustion. And for the first time, I allowed myself to truly grieve. It was a strange, complex grief. It wasn't for the son I had just lost in that mahogany-paneled conference room, it was for the son I realized I had never truly had. The loving, attentive man on this cruise had been a carefully crafted illusion. The distant, self-absorbed man from the past 4 years had been the devastating reality. The poison in the tea had been a physical threat, but the poison of that realization was a deeper, more enduring wound to my soul. The moment I was back on the solid ground of Seattle, I bypassed the waiting limousine the cruise line had arranged and took a taxi straight to the airport. I didn't want any more luxury, any more special treatment. I just wanted to go home. The sight of my little bookstore, the printed page, standing proudly on its corner in Annapolis, was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was real. It was mine. Clara, my manager and dear friend, must have been watching for me, because she ran out the door the moment my taxi pulled up. She threw her arms around me in a fierce, protective hug. "Oh, Eleanor, I was so worried," she whispered into my hair. I had a bad feeling about that whole trip. "You looked so fragile when you left." "I'm stronger now, Clara," I told her, and as I said the words, I knew they were true. Much stronger. My first and only stop the next morning was Janice's office. My lawyer, my rock. She had already received the full, detailed, encrypted report from the cruise line's head of security, including digital copies of all my evidence. She had it all laid out on her massive conference table, a neat, damning chronicle of betrayal. "They didn't even put up a fight," Janice said, her voice crisp with satisfaction. The cruise line's lawyers presented them with a non-disclosure agreement and a full refund of their cruise fare. They signed immediately. "They know what you have on them, Eleanor. They're terrified of you." "Good," I said simply. It wasn't about fear, but about consequences. "Now," she said, her demeanor shifting from warrior to architect. She slid a thick stack of freshly printed documents across the polished table towards me. "Let's fix this. Let's build you a fortress. Permanently." For the next 2 hours, we methodically and ruthlessly dismantled the legal structure of my old life and built a new one. We started with my will and my living trust. Michael's name, which had been listed as the primary beneficiary and the executor of my estate, was struck with a satisfying finality. His potential inheritance, which would have been substantial, was entirely redirected. Next, we tackled the durable power of attorney. The very document that Michael had been so eager to activate against me was legally revoked and shredded. A new one was drawn up, naming Janice as my primary agent, and my trusted Clara as the secondary. They, not my son, would be the ones to make decisions for me if I ever truly became unable to make them for myself. But the most important part, for me, was protecting Richard's legacy. I couldn't bear the thought of the printed page being sold off to the highest bidder, its shelves emptied, its soul gutted to become a trendy coffee shop or a souvenir store. With Janice's brilliant legal guidance, we created an irrevocable charitable trust. The trust's sole purpose, upon my death, would be to own and operate the printed page in perpetuity, ensuring it would remain a bookstore and a community hub for generations to come. Any profits would be used for its upkeep and to fund local literacy programs for underprivileged children. Richard's dream would be safe forever. Finally, I asked Janice to draft one last document. It was the charter for a new scholarship fund, established in my late husband's name. The Richard Vance Memorial Scholarship would be awarded annually to a deserving female student pursuing a degree in a field that required unimpeachable integrity and moral courage, specifically, law or pharmacology. With each powerful stroke of the pen, with each signature I placed on those documents, I felt a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. The clean, decisive scratch of ink on paper was the sound of me reclaiming my life, my future, and my peace of mind. I was severing the final legal and emotional ties that bound me to their greed. I was choosing my own legacy, on my own terms. When it was all done, I sat back in the leather chair, the sun streaming through the window of Janice's office. "Janice," I said, a thought striking me. "What about Sophia? The waitress? None of this would have been possible without her courage." Janice smiled, a rare, warm expression that transformed her face. "Way ahead of you, Eleanor. I got the full employee manifest from the cruise line. I already have a private investigator tracking her down. When we find her, I have a feeling she'll be the very first, very worthy recipient of the Richard Vance Memorial Scholarship. I smiled back, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. It felt good. I thought about the cycle of kindness, a legacy far more valuable than money. Sophia had helped me because of the painful memory of her grandmother. Now, I would help her in loving memory of my husband. That was an inheritance worth leaving. That was a story worth telling. Life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. It was a rhythm I set myself. The first thing I did was hire a locksmith. I had the locks changed on my apartment and on the front and back doors of the bookstore. I also had a discreet, modern security system installed. It wasn't that I was living in fear of them, not anymore. It was a practical matter, a declaration of sovereignty. It was like mending a fence around my property. I was securing my borders, both physical and emotional. Weeks turned into months, and the quiet healing began. I submerged myself in the comforting, predictable world of books. I rearranged the entire poetry section, just as Richard had always wanted to, creating a cozy reading nook with a comfortable armchair. I started a Saturday morning story hour for the neighborhood children. The sound of their bright, infectious laughter filling the old store was a better medicine than any doctor could prescribe. It chased away the last of the shadows. One crisp autumn day, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. The return address was from a law firm in Florida I didn't recognize. My hand was perfectly steady as I slid it open with Richard's old letter opener. It wasn't a formal notice of a lawsuit. It was something far more insidious. It was a long, rambling letter written by Michael's lawyer on his behalf. It was a masterpiece of manipulative self-pity and veiled threats. It spoke of Michael's deep and abiding remorse and his profound concern that the significant legal changes I had made had been executed while I was under extreme emotional duress and possible outside influence. It didn't directly ask for money. It pleaded for a more equitable family reconciliation, which was lawyer speak for a negotiation. It was a final, desperate attempt to guilt and frighten me into giving them something, anything. I read the letter once, a faint, sad smile on my lips. They still didn't get it. They still thought I was the same woman who had boarded that cruise. I walked over to the new, heavy-duty paper shredder I had bought for the bookstore's office and fed the letter into it. The whining grind as the machine devoured their carefully crafted words was the most satisfying sound I had heard in months. It was the sound of their last, pathetic attempt to control my narrative being turned into meaningless, cross-cut strips of paper. I did not reply. Their letter, and their existence, had been rendered irrelevant. My own lawyer, Janice, handled their lawyer. I never saw the official correspondence, but Janice told me it was brutally brief. She sent them a single, concise email. In it, she politely informed them that in the event of any legal challenge whatsoever to my revised estate plan, the full, unredacted evidence package from the cruise, including the high-definition video of their confession, the official toxicology reports from both the Juneau lab and the ship's doctor, and their signed non-disclosure agreement with the cruise line, would be immediately submitted to the court and, as a matter of public record, released to the national press. 2 weeks later, Janice received a final, one-sentence email from the Florida law firm. Our client will not be pursuing this matter further. The war was over. The silence was final. I had one. One bright Saturday afternoon, Sophia came to the bookstore. She was no longer the timid, frightened waitress in a starched uniform. She was a confident young woman, dressed in the casual jeans and sweater of a college student, her shoulders back, her eyes bright with a future that was now, finally, within her grasp. She had received the official scholarship notification and had driven 3 hours from her university to thank me in person. She didn't come empty-handed. She presented me with a small, simple glass jar filled with fragrant, loose-leaf tea. It was a blend of organic peppermint and lemon balm. A little handwritten tag was tied around the lid with a piece of twine. It read, "Safe to drink." Tears sprang to my eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. We sat in the two worn, comfortable armchairs at the back of the store, the ones where Richard and I used to sit for hours, and we drank tea together. It tasted of citrus and sunshine and quiet comfort. It tasted like peace. We talked for hours, not about the darkness of the past, but about the brightness of her future. I never heard from Michael or Victoria again. I heard through a distant family rumor that they had sold their house and moved to a different state, their grand ambitions and dreams of a lavish inheritance turned to ash. Sometimes, late at night, when the store is quiet and the only sound is the ticking of the old grandfather clock, I wonder if they ever look at each other and see the true reflection of what they tried to do. I wonder if the poison they had intended for me ended up poisoning their own lives, their own relationship, forever. But then I closed that chapter of my mind and let the thought drift away. Their story is no longer my concern. I stand here now, in my bookstore, my sanctuary, surrounded by the stories of 1,000 other lives. My own life did not end on that cruise ship. In many ways, it began again. I learned that the cruelest betrayals often come wrapped in a smile. I learned that your greatest strength can be forged in the fire of your deepest wounds. And I learned that a person's true inheritance isn't about what you leave behind in a bank vault, but what you build and protect in your heart. My story is not about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about the quiet, powerful, revolutionary act of refusing to be a victim in the story of your own life. It's about looking at the poison cup you are being offered, and choosing, with a steady hand, not to drink. The silence from my son is no longer a painful void that haunts me. It is a peaceful, welcome space that I have filled with the rustle of turning pages, with the laughter of children, with the warmth of true friendship, and with the quiet, steady rhythm of my own breathing. It is the sound of a life that is, finally and completely, my own.